All right, so the divine spark of Jesus. Okay, so the idea here is this. If you read Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, if you read Dante, the Divine Comedy, if you read any of the great books, you will see the divine spark reflected in you, okay? These great books are a portal into the divine. The problem, though, is most people cannot read the Iliad or the Divine Comedy, okay? So the question then is, what do the common people do? And the answer is, Jesus is a portal into the divine, right? So if you just remember the life of Jesus, if you just recite his sayings, that will give you access to the divine. That will remind you of who you are. So yes, Homer and Dante are great. I love Homer and Dante, but you have to be very educated in order to read Homer and Dante well. Whereas Jesus, anyone can know the story of Jesus. Anyone can say what he says, and then that will give you access to the divine, okay? So Jesus is really about the democratization of the divine, okay? Jesus allows anyone to access the divine, whereas before, you had to access the divine through poetry, okay? All right, so the life of Jesus, okay, so again, Jesus is Jewish. So the center of Jewish life is Jerusalem, okay? Right here, Jerusalem. And in the center of Jerusalem is a temple, which was rebuilt under the Persians, right? And Herod will rebuild this, will renovate this, okay? So we know that Jesus was born in this area, Galilee. As you can see, Galilee is by the coast, which makes this region extremely cosmopolitan. So from an early age, Jesus is experiencing different religions, different cultures. Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, okay? All right, so this is an AI depiction of the crucifixion of Jesus. Jesus is in the middle. And as you can see, it is a brutal event. Okay, so we don't know much about Jesus. We only know Jesus from the Bible. Then in 1945, in a place called Nag Hammadi, okay, this is in Egypt, we discovered lots of books with sayings of Jesus that we didn't know existed before. So what's important to understand is that after Jesus died, there were many different sects of Christianity that believed different things, and they argued with each other, and ultimately, it was the Catholic Church who won. Why? Because the Catholic Church is run by the Roman Empire, okay? So one major book that was discovered in 1945 in Nag Hammadi that was lost to us is called the Gospel of Thomas. And what I believe is the Gospel of Thomas records the true teachings of Jesus. Okay? So let's first look at the true teachings of Jesus, and then I'll explain to you why I think this is actually his true teachings. All right, so can you read the highlighted part, okay?
And he said, whoever finds an interpretation of these sayings will not experience death.
Okay, all right, so okay, listen, this already makes sense, right? Because in the universe, death doesn't exist. Because after you die, your soul goes up to the astral plane, to the divine, okay? So your soul can never die. But you have to recognize that you are the divine spark, okay? You first need to recognize that. Once you recognize that, you'll be immortal. But if you don't recognize that, then you fear death, okay?
Jesus said, let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will become troubled. When he becomes troubled, he will be astonished, and he will rule over the all.
Okay, so this goes back to the Plato's allegory of the cave, right? Remember, Plato's allegory of the cave is this prisoner who escapes his chains. He goes up into the real world where there's sunlight, and he sees the truth, right? And now he's able to see, whereas everyone else is still chained as prisoners in the cave. And now he rules over all, because he knows the truth, whereas everyone else is still imprisoned in darkness. But remember that this is a painful process. When you go out in the light, you're blinded by it. You feel absolute pain. You feel confusion. But over time, if you persist, you will see the truth. Okay? So this is the allegory of the cave. Okay? Keep on going.
Jesus said, "If those who lead you say to you, 'See, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourself, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty."
Okay, so this is a really important idea, okay? Go back to the allegory of the cave. When you escape the cave and you see the real world and you come back, it doesn't matter if you tell them what the real world is, okay? It doesn't matter if they believe you. They themselves have to go out and see the real world for themselves, okay? They have to break the chains themselves and then venture out into the light and experience pain and torment for themselves before they recognize the truth, okay? That's what Jesus is saying. People who tell you this stuff, don't listen to them, okay? They can only guide you, but you can't trust them. You can't believe in them. You have to believe in yourself. You have to look into yourself because the truth, the divine spark, is inside of you, okay? So what Jesus is saying is this: organized religion does not work, guys. So there's no way Jesus would say, "Follow me and you're good. Believe in me and you're good." He would never ever say that because he knows you can't follow someone else. You have to believe in yourself. The divine spark is in you. Okay? Does that make sense? So they are lying to you. When they say the kingdom is in heaven, don't believe them. Okay? Another thing that you will notice is we're all sons of the living Father. You understand? Jesus is not like, "I'm the Son of God and you're not. I'm superior to you." They're saying we're all sons of the living Father. Okay? Also, and this is really important, he actually doesn't, throughout the Gospel of Thomas, he actually doesn't refer to the Bible. Okay? He doesn't talk about Adam and Eve. He doesn't talk about Yahweh. He doesn't talk about David. He doesn't talk about Moses. Because for him, it's all fake. Okay? The Bible is fake. What's true is the divine spark in you. Okay? All right? So again, all this is contradicting modern day Christianity because Jesus was not a Christian. Okay? Keep on going. Oh, sorry. Let's keep on going. And again, guys, what you're seeing is this: the similarities between the Gospel of Thomas and Plato's allegory of the cave, and the Iliad, and Zarathustra, his teachings, as well as Nietzsche. Okay, you see how all these poet prophets, they all think alike. They're expressing things differently. They're talking to a different age, to a different audience, but basically saying the same thing. Okay, that's really important. All right. Continue reading, please.
Jesus saw infants being suckled. He said to his disciples, "These infants being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom." They said to him, "Shall we then, as children, enter the kingdom?" Jesus said to them, "When you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, so that the male not be male nor the female. And when you fashion eyes in the place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, and a likeness in place of a likeness, then will you enter the kingdom."
Okay, so again, this is similar to what we've learned before, right? What he's saying is this: we are born into this world, and as we grow older, we believe in the falseness that we see around us. Okay? But once we develop our imagination, and once you recognize that this world that we live in is our hallucination, it is just a projection of our imagination, then we can take control over this world. And then that will allow us to access the divine. Okay? It is through the imagination which allows us to access the divine. And it will allow us to create this world in a new place. We're able to fashion eyes in the place of an eye, a hand in the place of a hand. We're able to be our true selves. Okay? And what we will understand is that we're all connected by the divine. The separation of like male, female, Okay? Chinese, American, black, white. It's all made up. It's not true. Once we're able to see reality as it is, we'll all be one and the same. When you make the two one, we make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below. We're all interconnected together, okay? We're all part of the same source. But we have to train ourselves to see the truth from this falsehood. Okay, so again, the idea of Asha and Drush, right? This is Asha, moving towards the interconnectedness of all things, the harmony of all things. The Drush is the division of all things, okay? All right.
His disciples said to him, "Show us a place where you are, since it is necessary for us to seek it." He said to them, "Whoever has ears, let him hear. There is light within the man of light, and he lights up the whole world. If he does not shine, he is darkness."
Okay, so the disciple says to Jesus, "Tell us how to be like you." And Jesus says, "Be yourself. There's a light inside of you, okay? Look for the light and like shine the world." Okay? All right, keep on going.
Jesus said, "I took my place in the midst of the world, and I appeared to them in flesh. I found all of them intoxicated. I found none of them thirsty. And my soul become afflicted for the sons of men, because they are blind in their hearts and do not have sight. For empty they came into the world, and empty too they seek to leave the world. But for the moment they are intoxicated. When they shake off their wine, then they will repent." Jesus said, "If the flesh came into being because of spirit, it is a wonder. But if spirit came into being because of the body, it is a wonder of wonders. Indeed, I am amazed at how this great wealth has made its home in its poverty."
Okay, so he's talking about the materialistic world, okay? We came into this world with nothing. And guess what? When we die, we're gonna go back with nothing, okay? So this pursuit of materialism, this pursuit of wealth, this pursuit of power makes no sense. Why are you here pursuing all this stuff, this gold, this wealth, this money that you can't take with you? It seems as though you're drunk, okay? So this line, if the flesh came into being because of spirit, is a wonder. Okay, so the idea is that it is the consciousness, the mind that creates the material world, the body, right? That makes sense. And what Jesus is saying is this: if you think that the body creates a spirit, you're crazy. It's impossible. It's a wonder of wonders. That's impossible, guys. Why? Because the spirit is full of wealth, and the body is impoverished. How is it possible that an impoverished body is able to create so much wealth? Okay? And this makes sense, right? Our mind, our consciousness is so vast, so abundant, but our bodies are so limited. So how is it possible that our smaller brain is able to create a universe of ideas and experiences? Okay? All right? So the idea of intoxicated. We're here and we're just drunk. But we are not thirsty for the truth. We're happy for the way it is, okay? All right, and this idea is mirrored in a poem that we read before by Rumi, right? So you may remember Rumi, the Persian poet. He also says this: the world that we live in is a prison for drunks. Okay, so I'm pretty sure Rumi did not read Jesus' Gospel of Thomas. Okay? But they're able to think the same thoughts because they're all being inspired by the same source. Does that make sense? All right, continue, please.
Jesus said, "The Pharisees and the scribes have taken the keys of knowledge." This is
Gnosis. Gnosis just means knowledge, okay?
"And hidden them. They themselves have not entered, nor have they allowed to enter those who wish to. You, however, be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves." Okay,
so Jesus hates organized religion. Okay, the Pharisees, remember, are Jewish priests, Jewish leaders, and they create a hierarchy of religion where they say to people, "Only I know the truth. Only I have knowledge. So listen to me." And what Jesus is saying is, they themselves are ignorant because you cannot access knowledge through hierarchy, okay? Through oppressing other people. You can only access knowledge by looking into yourself. So you have to become like the serpent and pretend you don't know anything in order to access knowledge yourself, because otherwise, if you are capable of accessing knowledge, then the priest will see it as a threat and they will kill you. All right? And the serpent, remember, it was a serpent who told Eve to eat from the fruit. And so what Jesus is saying is, it is good and natural to seek knowledge, even if it means disobeying God. Okay? That's what we're meant to do here, to seek knowledge, to seek the truth, to seek love. If the priests stop you from doing so, it's because they're evil. All right? Because remember, the true God, the monad, is pure love, pure compassion, pure forgiveness. He can do no wrong. He's perfection. And if you have the desire to seek knowledge and you believe that knowledge makes you a happier, more fulfilled person, then you should seek knowledge, even if God tells you don't do so. Because if that God tells you don't do so, it means he's a false God. Okay? Keep on going.
Jesus said, "Whoever has come to understand the world as found only a corpse, and whoever has found a corpse is superior to the world."
Okay, so this is what's going to get Jesus in trouble, right? He's saying the Roman Empire, this great empire that you've built, that ranges across the Mediterranean, it's a corpse. It's dying. It's dead. It's nothing. All right? And once you recognize this, once you refuse to comply, once you refuse to obey, they have no power over you, right? And so that's a threat to power. That's a threat to the Roman Empire. Keep on going.
Jesus said, "The kingdom is like a shepherd who had a 100 sheep. One of them, the largest, went astray. He left the 99 sheep and looked for that one until he found it. When he had gone to such trouble, he said to the sheep, 'I care for you more than the 99.'"
Okay, so God, the true God, does not want obedience. He wants us to be creative. He wants us to seek knowledge. He wants us to discover. He wants us to explore. He wants us to try new things. And if we do this, he cares for us than those who obey him. Because those who obey him, those who do nothing, contribute nothing to the universe. Okay? When we love, when we imagine we are making the universe a brighter place, we are shining our light. When we just sit back and just do what we're told, we're doing nothing, okay? We're like NPCs. Do you guys know NPCs? Non-playable characters in a video game, okay? We don't exist. All right, keep on going.
Jesus said, "A man had received visitors, and when he had prepared the dinner, he sent his servant to invite the guests. He went to the first one and said to him, 'My master invites you,' he said. 'I have claim against some merchants. They are coming to me this evening. I must go and give them my orders. I ask to be excused from the dinner.' He went to another and said to him, 'My master has invited you,' he said to him. 'I have just bought a house and am required for the day. I shall not have any spare time.' He went to another and said to him, 'My master invites you,' he said to him. 'My friend is going to get married, and I am to prepare the banquet. I shall not be able to come. I ask to be excused from the dinner.' He went to another and said to him, 'My master invites you,' he said to him. 'I have just bought a farm, and I am on my way to collect the rent. I shall not be able to come. I ask to be excused.' The servant returned and said to his master, 'Those whom you invited to the dinner have asked to be excused.' The master said to his servant, 'Go outside to the streets and bring back those whom you happen to meet, so that they may dine. Businessmen and merchants will not enter the places of my Father.'"
Okay, so again, this goes against the empire. What Jesus is saying is the worst people in this world are the rich people. Okay, think about today how we're supposed to worship Elon Musk, right? Because he's rich. What Jesus is saying is, no, Elon Musk is the worst person in the world. Why? Because the divine, the monad, has prepared a great feast for us. When we die, when we go to the monad, we will experience the greatest happiness, the greatest joy. Okay? The monad's inviting us. But the business people are saying, no, I'm too busy. I'm too busy making money. I'm too busy doing evil in this world, so I don't want to go to the stupid feast. So they're the ones who will lose out in the end, even though today we think they've won out. Okay? So that's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is like, don't worry about the rich and the powerful. They may look happy, but they're not. At the end of days, when we all go back to the monad, we all go back to the vine, they're the ones who will not be invited to the grand feast. Yeah?
I have a question that God led us to be creative and like do our thing that we want to do, like seek for the spark. But since we are born, how can we really know the things that what we want to do? I think that requires socialization between other people. But if you socialize, they will brainwash you and affect to let you to seek for materialism.
Yeah, okay. That's a great question. And it's a problem, right? Because as you say, your parents, the school, society brainwashes you to believe that only money matters, only grades matter. Okay? And the answer is you have to be brave. You have to be true to yourself. Because you yourself know what is true, right? If we didn't know, then Jesus would not matter. What if 2 billion people believe in Jesus? Because they know that Jesus spoke the truth. Okay? So listen to your heart. I know it's hard, and most of us cannot do it. Okay? And that's why in many traditions, like Buddhism and Hinduism, reincarnation is important. Because maybe in this lifetime we don't figure it out, maybe in the next lifetime. But maybe then, 50 lifetimes away. But eventually you'll figure it out. Eventually you'll figure out that what other people say does not matter because this world we live in is a false world. Eventually you'll figure that out. And then you're like, you know what I should do? I should do what I believe to be true. And then what you recognize is, oh, when I actually do what I like, what I enjoy, it makes me a more fulfilled person. And guess what? It connects me to the vine. Okay? I am a much more spiritual person now. And you can know because look at people's faces, right? When you meet a rich person, his face is kind of, evil. When you meet a person who's generous, who volunteers his time, who is a good teacher, his face is different, okay? So remember Achilles. When you do evil, evil comes into you and it corrupts your soul. When you do good, good comes to you and it brightens your soul and you brighten the world with it, okay?
But without education and socialization, if we are an infant, how do we know what is right or wrong and what should we seek for?
Because of the spark in you, right? Because of the spark in you. You know when it glows. When you love someone and that person loves you back, your spark glows. When you become a teacher and you teach students and your students learn well, your spark glows.
Okay? So you try different things until you find the things that make your spark glow.
Yeah, and so the important idea is that our lives are infinite, okay? So we will die, and die is like a game reset, okay? It's just like you suck at this game, you die, you come back, and you try again, okay? But it's your choice. A really important idea here is free will. It's your choice to do whatever you want with your life. No one's gonna force you, okay? So the idea of when you die is you go back to the astral plane, and then you're able to reflect on your own life, and then you come back and you start over. Eventually you'll figure it out. It may take 1,000,000 years, it may take 1,000 years, who knows, but eventually you'll figure it out. Okay? Because the world is infinite. Does that make sense? Okay? What's really important to understand is you have to figure it out by yourself. No one can teach you. I can give you the idea, Jesus can tell you what he thinks, but you have to figure it out by yourself, okay? And that's why this is so hard for people to accept. Because people don't want to accept individual responsibility, okay? All right, okay, so this gives us, so the problem is this. The problem is that Jesus says that there's a spark inside of you, and it's your responsibility. You don't have to, but it's your responsibility to let it grow. If you let it grow, you'll bring happiness to the world, you'll bring happiness to yourself, and then you'll be able to feast with a monad, with a vine, in heaven. Okay? And as I said, as we discussed, it's hard, man. It's really hard. You have to take individual responsibility. You have to ignore people around you. You have to learn for yourself. So, this idea, maybe a few people, thousands, tens of thousands, will love this idea. But what about the millions of other people who just want to live normal lives? What can we do about them? Okay? So this is the book, The Brothers Karamazov by Theodore Dostoevsky. He's talking about the problem left by Jesus. Jesus comes to the world. He tells us the truth. He tells us freedom is what will enable us to seek the divine. But this creates this anxiety in people because oh my God, now I have to think for myself. Now I have to go out into the light and feel all this pain. But I don't want to. I just want to live a happy life. I just want to watch TV every day, man. And then so then the church is okay, we need to create an organized religion and we need to fool people, okay? How do we fool people? By teaching them that Jesus did actually say these things. And we will not worship Jesus, we will worship Satan instead. Why? Because Satan encourages us to enforce our will on people. Okay? We need to be evil in order to do good in the world. Okay? Think about this. These children are naughty, right? Now, we can say to them like Jesus, hey man, you'll grow up one day and then you won't be naughty. So, okay? But in this process, you're going to hurt each other. You're going to do stupid things. So we have to be the strict father. We have to create this church in order to enforce the law on people to make sure the children don't hurt themselves, so that children can just be children. Okay? And quite honestly, most of you guys, 99% of you guys will never ever grow up. So we have to be Satan, okay? So the church, the Catholic Church, will pretend to worship Jesus, but actually, we're going to worship Satan. And so we're going to enforce the law on people. We will now be the evil empire. The Roman Empire is dead, okay? But now the Catholic Church will be the evil empire. And we're going to go around and we're going to persecute people who disobey the law so that everyone can live in peace. People want to be sheep. And you know what? People have the right to be sheep. And so we're going to be the shepherd. We will be Satan. And we will enforce goodness on people whether they like it or not. And this is good for people because now they don't have to accept individual responsibility, right? If my life sucks, it's not because of me, it's because of the devil. It's because of the Catholic Church. It's because of Satan. And that's what's good. Okay? So, Dostoevsky is saying this is how the Catholic Church came into being. And we'll discuss this in the next class in more detail, okay? Because Jesus left a huge problem, a void in the hearts of people. People want to obey. People want to be told what to do. People don't want to think for themselves. If you make people think for themselves, they'll feel nothing but fear and anxiety. Okay? So we need to impose order. So in this story, what happens is the Catholic Church is being the evil empire. It is oppressing people. And so one day, Jesus comes from heaven and he walks among the people. And people will know, oh my God, he's come back. And he's curing people and they're all happy. But because the Catholic Church worships Satan, they need to arrest this guy. Okay? And the Grand Inquisitor, the leader, appears before Jesus. They have a conversation that Jesus is called a prisoner in the story. And he says to the prisoner, we know who you are. You are Jesus. And we're supposed to worship you, but we're going to have to kill you because you are a threat to the people. You're a threat to the happiness of the people. Okay? And what the Grand Inquisitor will say to Jesus is, we create good in this world by being evil. And your presence will destroy this. And therefore, we must destroy you. Okay? So this is from the brothers Karamazov. Okay? Thou this. Okay?
Thou didst not love them at all, thou who didst come to give thy life for them. Instead of taking possession of man's freedom, thou didst increase it and burden the spiritual kingdom of mankind with its suffering forever.
Okay, so what he's saying is you came to this world to free people, to tell them that the world not exists, that there's a spark inside them, that they don't have to be slaves, they can go where they want. But that just confuses people. That traps people in their own fear and anxiety. Life now becomes complicated. Okay, keep on going.
Thou didst desire man's free love, that he should follow thee freely, enticed and taken captive by thee. In place of the rigid ancient law, man must hereafter with free heart decide for himself what is good and what is evil, having only thy image before him as his guide.
Okay, this is like really annoying, okay, for people, because before your teacher will tell you what is good and what is evil. Now the teacher is saying, you guys decide. Now it's complete chaos. Okay, and again, it creates anxiety in people. People just want to be told what to do. Okay, people were like, at 5 o'clock, we're going to have dinner at Pizza Hut, okay? People don't want to be like, what should I have for dinner? Okay, people don't want to think, man. Okay, keep on going.
But didst thou not know that he would at last reject even thy image and thy truth, if he is weighed down with a fearful burden of free choice? They will cry aloud at last that the truth is not in thee, for they could not have been left in greater confusion and suffering than thou hast caused, laying upon them so many cares and unanswerable problems.
Okay, right? You're creating all this anxiety in people for no particular reason. People were happy just being slaves. And now you free them and they're completely confused as to what to do next. All right, keep on reading.
Only some thousands.
Okay, so what he's saying again is your freedom is only good for the minority of people who can think for themselves, who aspire to the divine. What about everyone else?
And what of the rest? And how are the other weak ones to blame, because they cannot endure what the strong have endured? How is a weak soul to blame that it is unable to receive such terrible gifts? Canst thou have simply come to the elect and for the elect? But if so, it is a mystery and we cannot understand it. And if it is a mystery, we too have a right to preach a mystery, and to teach them that it's not the free judgment of their hearts, not love that mattered, but a mystery which they must follow blindly, even against their conscience, so we have done.
Okay, all right. So what he's saying is this, okay? I understand Christianity is complete chaos, okay? But this complete chaos means people will never understand what your true teachings are. And if people don't understand what your true teachings are, they don't have to follow it. They don't have to think for themselves, okay? So we created complete chaos so that people will not be forced to obey us, okay? That's why we corrupted your teachings. Keep on going.
We have corrected thy work and have founded it upon miracle, mystery, and authority. And men rejoice that they were again led like sheep, and that the terrible gift that had brought them such suffering was at last lifted from their hearts. Where we write teaching them this, speak. Did we not love mankind so meekly acknowledging their feebleness, lovingly lightening their burden, and permitting their weak nature even sin with or sanction? Why hast thou come now to hinder us?
Okay, do you understand this idea? The understand is, why is there evil in the world? Because people don't want to think for themselves. So you need evil people to command people, to enslave people, to force them against their will. Now people are like, well, I don't have a choice in the matter. I can't think for myself. Sorry, man. Okay? If you actually give people complete freedom, it'd be complete chaos in the world. That's why there's Satan. That's why there's Satan in this world. This is why Satan must rule this world. Okay?
I meant to end it like this. When the inquisitor ceased speaking, he waited some time for his prisoner to answer him. His silence weighed down upon him. He saw that the prisoner had listened intently all the time, looking gently in his face and evidently not wishing to reply. The old man longed for him to say something, however bitter and terrible. But he suddenly approached an old man in silence and softly kissed him on his bloodless aged lips. That was all his answer. The old man shuddered. His lips moved. He went to the door, opened it, and said to him, "Go, and come no more. Come not at all. Never, never." And he led him out into the dark alleys of the town. The prisoner went away. And the old man, the keys closed in his heart, but the old man adheres to his idea.
Okay, so the person, of course, is Jesus, right? And so the inquisitor has these great arguments. And the inquisitor is right. And what he's saying is, okay, Jesus, what's your response to this? And Jesus' response is basically, I forgive you. I love you and I forgive you. Same thing as what Priam did to Achilles, right? And as you can see, by kissing the inquisitor rather than fighting him, the inquisitor loses. He knows he's lost. He knows he's been humbled. So he lets Jesus go, says, just get out of here. Please don't bother us again, okay? This is not your world. This is Satan's world. And the kiss glows in his heart, but the old man adheres to his ideas, okay? So Jesus did not change the old man's mind, okay? But there's a spark in him that now glows, okay? The spark that he killed, that he tried all this time to kill with reason, with evil, is still able to glow, okay? And that's the power of forgiveness. Even though the person seems to be the most evil person in the world, and this guy really is the most evil person in the world, as long as you're able to show him the possibility of love, the spark will glow, okay? Now, so the inquisitor poses this problem like, okay, people don't want to think for themselves. People lack free will. People don't want free will. What's the solution? The solution is the soul is eternal, okay? And you have to give people time. We're talking about like millions of years. Maybe not in 50 years, people will figure it out, but in about 1,000,000 years, people will figure it out for themselves, okay? And Jesus, God, is patient. He's loving. He's forgiving. He's generous. He's compassionate. So take your time, okay? What's important is that people learn for themselves. Eventually, you'll figure out being a slave sucks. You know what? It may seem as though watching Netflix, playing video games, being online all the time is fun, but if you go outside and play, that's a lot more fun, guys. Eventually, you'll figure it out, all right? And you have to figure it by yourself. So God is forever patient. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so next class, we'll talk about the Catholic Church and how it came into being and why it really is a church of Satan. All right, why it's going to go against the teachings of Jesus. But Dostoevsky pointed this out, how the Catholic Church and Jesus are competing forces, okay? All right, now let's go on to Divine Comedy by Dante. And again, Dante is trying to answer the question, why did Jesus have to kill himself? What's the logic of that? That makes no sense, okay? And traditionally, what the Catholic Church teaches people is, it's because when we do evil, we become slaves of Satan. So Jesus made a deal with Satan. Basically, Jesus says, I will die, and then you can take my body, okay? And then you will have to free my people. And Satan's like, that's a really good deal, man. God in exchange for these slaves? Sure, I'll make that deal. But the thing is that Jesus, when he died and he freed us, he cannot ever truly die. Okay? Does that make sense? So this is called a ransom theory. And this is how, during Dante's time, most people understood why Jesus had to die. Jesus died so that we would stop being slaves of Satan, and now we are slaves to Jesus. And that's why we must worship Jesus. And Dante's like, no, that can't possibly be right, okay? God will not come to free us so that we become slaves to God. God came to free us so that we could be free, okay? All right, so this is Dante. And what's going to happen here is, in heaven, there's going to be a conversation between Dante and Beatrice, who he loves, okay? And they're going to discuss the nature of the universe. And this is Beatrice talking to Dante.
The greatest gift, the magnanimity of God, as he created, gave the gift most suited to his goodness. Gift that he most prizes was the freedom of the will.
Okay, so the underlying principle of the universe is freedom of will. If God is love, okay, and he loves people, then he must trust people. Therefore, freedom of will is the most important principle, okay? Same thing if you're a parent. If you truly love your child, you will let your child go and make his own mistakes. You will not protect your child. Okay? Even if it means that your child goes to the park and might get kidnapped or whatever, okay? You have to let him go. You have to let him or her go because true love means trusting other people. Okay? Keep on going.
You say, what I have heard is clear to me, but this is hidden from me. Why God willed precisely this pathway for redemption?
Okay, so again, the Catholic Church teaches you that Jesus redeemed us from our sins, okay? But then the question is, why did Jesus have to kill himself again? That makes no sense. Keep on going.
Brother, this ordinance is buried from the eyes of everyone whose intellect has not matured within the flame of love.
So Beatrice is saying to Dante, yes, I know this makes no sense because you're thinking with your mind. But the mind is not where the spark is, okay? The divine spark is in the heart. So stop thinking with your mind and feel with your heart. And let the spark, the divine spark, glow in you, and then you will see the truth for yourself. Sorry. Okay, keep on going.
The godly godness that has banished every envy from its own self burn in itself, and sparkling so, it shows internal beauties. All that derives directly from this godness is everlasting, since the seal of godness impressed an imprint that never alters.
Okay, so God is perfect. He's forever good. He's forever love. He's forever compassion, forever forgiveness, okay? And there's a spark of God in us, right? The divine spark, which is our hearts. So there's always this perfection in us, okay? Keep on going.
Only man's sin annuls man's liberty, makes him unlike the highest good, so that in him the brightness of its light is dim.
Okay, this is important, okay? Even though the spark is forever in us, we can cover it up with mud. We can cover it up with dirt. We can forget about it, okay? How? By doing evil. By disobeying. All right? If we do more and more evil, we forget the spark more and more, and it dims in us. So the spark can glow or it can dim depending on our actions. But the spark will always be there.
So if, like you said, that parents, the true love is to trust, right? So if parents trust their kid, they will let their kids to make mistakes. But what if kids are, for example, being kidnapped and they're being killed? Is that still count as the love of trust?
Okay, obviously, if your child is in danger, you go save your child, okay? But you cannot let your fear and anxiety of your child being kidnapped destroy the child's freedom. Does that make sense? You cannot impose your fear on your child.
Like you need to let your child to feel the anxieties.
No. You have to let your child do what your child wants to do. If your child wants to go play in the playground, you let the child go play in the playground, okay? And if you feel like there's a danger, then you go and make sure that your child is safe. You understand?
But still letting him to do what they want.
Yeah, okay. Look, when you're actually a parent, you know what is safe and what is not safe, okay? Sending your child to the playground where there are other children, there are adults around, is safe. Do you understand? Sending your child outside at midnight to wander the streets is not safe. Do you understand? Okay? You know. You don't have to think about this. All right? All right. Okay, keep on reading.
And man cannot regain his dignity unless, within left emptiness, man fills a void with just immense for evil pleasure.
Okay, so the problem is this. We do all this evil, and now we can't forgive ourselves, so we're stuck where we are. Okay? We cannot compensate for the evil that we do, so what we do is do more evil to ignore the fact that we cannot forgive ourselves. Does that make sense? So evil creates more evil. Evil compounds on evil. So now we're just stuck, okay? So by disobeying God, by eating that fruit, by trying to be like God, we created evil. And this evil forces us to be more evil. Now we're just stuck, okay?
For when your nature sinks so totally within its seed, then from these dignities, just as from paradise, that nature parted.
Okay, so we left the Garden of Eden not because we broke the law. We left the Garden of Eden because we cannot forgive ourselves from the evil that we've committed. And so we keep on doing more and more evil, okay? So the Garden of Eden is metaphorical. Keep on going.
And they can never be regained if you consider carefully by any way that did not pass across one of these fours. Either through nothing other than his mercy, God has to pardon man, or of himself man has to prefer payment for his folly.
Okay, so now that we've broken the law, now that we've disobeyed God, now that there's evil in our hearts, what can we do? Okay, and what Beatrice says is there's two possibilities. The first possibility is that we compensate for the first evil, for the first act of disobedience. And what Beatrice says is, you can't do that because you try to be God. You try to kill God. So you cannot ever compensate God for the evil that you've done, okay? And then she says, well, the other possibility is that God forgives you. The problem, though, is that if God just forgives you, you won't learn anything, okay? Keep on going.
Man in his limits could not recompense, for no obedience, no humility he offered later could have been so deep that it could match the heights he made to reach. Through disobedience, man lacked the power to offer satisfaction by himself.
Very good. Okay, so do you understand this idea? Okay, you try to be God, so you can't ever ask for forgiveness for that. Keep on going.
For God showed greater generosity in giving his own self that man might be able to rise, than if he simply pardoned. For every other means fell short of justice, except the way whereby the Son of God humbled himself, where he became incarnate.
Okay, incarnate just means human, okay? So this is why Jesus had to kill himself. All right, so the problem is that God has to forgive us. But he has to forgive us in a way that allows us to learn from our mistakes and be better people, okay? And so let's use an analogy. The analogy is this. I'm a father, and I have a daughter named Eve, and I have a dog. And I say to Eve, I love you, Eve, so much. And then Eve says to me, do you love me or do you love the dog more? And I said, I love you both equally. Love is infinite. Of course I love you, but I also love the dog. And Eve goes away and says to herself, yeah, but how do I know he truly loves me? So what Eve does is, she kills the dog, okay? And then Eve says to me, hey, do you love me or do you love the dog more? And now I'm kind of stuck, the father, right? Because if I punish her, that shows her I love the dog more, right? But if I don't punish her, she's going to do this again, okay? She's going to kill another animal. So I'm stuck. So what do? So what God decides to do is this. The only way out of this conundrum, the only way out of this paradox is if I punish myself. Okay? Because I should have said to her, I love you as much as the dog. Alright? So what I do is I take a whip and I hit myself. And Eve watches this. And now Eve knows, first of all, I do love her because I'm punishing myself for her sake. And second of all, she won't do it again because she doesn't want to see me punished. And that's why Jesus had to kill himself. Do you understand? That's the logic here. Now it makes sense, right? God had to punish himself so that we would be humbled by a sacrifice. We would feel so much remorse and regret for making God die that we would never ever disobey him again. We would never ever try to become God ourselves. And that's why this had to happen. Okay? And because of this, Jesus freed us from the evil in us and led us to the path of good. Because now, all we have to do is remember Jesus, remember what he said, remember what he taught, and we'll forever be on the path towards the light. Yes?
Do we, like, for example, if I had done extreme mistakes previously, can I completely make it up or just forgive myself? Because I think I can't.
Okay, that's a great point, okay? So yeah, so the problem is this. The problem is that there are people who do real evil in this world, okay? It's possible, like a man kills your daughter, and then he's put in prison for the longest time. And he does all this evil, and so can he be forgiven? And the answer is yes. Because the only way for this world to work is if people are allowed to be forgiven. If people are not allowed to be forgiven, this entire world, this entire universe breaks down. That's why God is a God of forgiveness. Okay? Because if you think about it, if you think, okay, if we don't have forgiveness, what world do we live in? We live in a world of vengeance, right? If you kill my daughter, then I have to go kill your daughter. And then you're going to have to go kill my family, and then I have to go kill your family, okay? So the only way for this world to work, the only way for justice to prevail is if we're allowed to forgive each other. And previously, we don't have a tool to forgive each other because we ourselves don't have the wisdom. And now with the arrival of Jesus, we remember that if Jesus forgives us, Jesus will forgive me always. And so if I turn towards Jesus, then I will be forgiven.
But like currently, I think I still could not forgive myself for making that mistake. Like I think whatever things that I do to make up the mistake, I think I could not forgive me at that time making that mistake.
Right, but at the same time, you went to prison, right? You've been punished already. So justice has been served. So you can now forgive yourself. Okay? Just because you believe in Jesus doesn't mean you won't go to prison for killing someone. You're still going to go to prison. But now you can forgive yourself because you've done your time and also because you remember that Jesus forgives you, okay? But the only way for you to move on in your life, the only way for society to move on is if you're able to forgive yourself. Okay? Does that make sense? If in a world there's no forgiveness, this world would break down really quickly because everyone would just kill each other. Okay? So, and again, what's happening is this, and this is what Dante teaches us. You're thinking with your head, okay? Because you're still young. When you grow older and your heart matures and you have more life experience, then you'll be able to feel with your heart. Once you feel with your heart, all this will make sense to you, okay? But I completely understand where you're coming from because at your age, if someone told me this, I'd be like, you're crazy. This makes no sense. Because if you do evil, then your entire life should be one of evil. If you do evil, evil should come to you. Okay? But what Jesus is saying is like, no, in that world, no one can be happy. Okay? Because the people whose evil has been done to them are so focused on vengeance, on hatred, on anger, that you can never ever be a happy person. Okay? You leave the monad, you leave the divine, okay? So when you hate someone, you're actually hating yourself as opposed to that person. Okay? All right. So now that we understand this idea, now what Don's going to explain is, why are we here? Okay? What's the purpose of the universe? Okay? Can you read, Alan?
You say, I see that water, see that fire and air and earth, and all that they compose come to the corruption and endure so briefly. And yet these two were things created. If what has been said above is true, then these things never should be subject to corruption.
Okay, so the idea is like God is perfect, everything He creates is perfect. So if that's the case, then why do we die? And so what Preacher says is this. God is perfect, He creates perfection, but He creates the laws of the universe. He creates the game, okay? That's perfect. But the things within the game enter a cycle of destruction and life and death, okay? Because that's the only way for the game, for the universe to work properly. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, keep on reading.
Brother, the angels and the pure country where you are now, these may be said to be created, and they are in all their being. Whereas the elements you have mentioned, as well as those things that are made from them, receive their form from a created power. The matter they contain has been created, just as within the stars that whirl about them. The power to give form had been created. The rays and motion of the holy lights draw forth the soul of every animal and plant from matter able to take form.
Okay, so do you understand? The world, the laws of the universe are created, okay?
But your life is breathed forth immediately by the chief God, good, who so enamors it of his own self that it desires him always. So reasoning, you also can deduce your resurrection. You need but remember the way in which your human flesh was fashioned. when both of the first parents were created.
Okay, so the world that we live in is a world in which we can make mistakes, in which we can learn, we can grow, okay? And we don't have to worry about making mistakes because when we die, all that will happen is we'll just return to the good and we will be reincarnated, okay? We'll come back. Jesus was resurrected, but we will be resurrected as well. And we have infinite opportunity to grow as souls. And that's the purpose of life, to learn, to make mistakes, to be creative, to imagine new possibilities. That's why we were created, okay? And to ensure that we can continue to grow, there's death, okay? Death allows for a reset. Death allows us to rejuvenate ourselves and learn from mistakes. So don't think about this lifetime, think about all possible lifetimes and live your life accordingly to that, okay? Make the most of your life here by making as many mistakes as possible, because only by making mistakes can you actually grow as a soul, okay? All right, so this is Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting, The Last Supper. Now, this depicts Jesus before his betrayal, before he is crucified by the Romans. Okay, what's really interesting about this painting is you can see there's a number here, right? 3, 3, 1, 3, 3. When you go to the Bible and you look for the passage 33:133 in Lamentations, you have this quotation.
For no one is cast off by the Lord forever. Through he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love, for it does not willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone.
Okay, that's who Jesus is, okay? Jesus came to remind us that we will all be forgiven in the end. So forgive other people, okay? Love your enemy. All right? Okay, so let's look at what actually the Bible says, okay? So this is what Jesus taught. And again, I believe this is what Jesus taught because one, the Gospel of Thomas is a unique voice. Remember, the thing about poetry is that it is unique. It is the divine spark itself. So it cannot be replicated, okay? So when we read the Gospel of Thomas, you can see this is poetic. And this is beautiful. When it touches you, it's a divine spark. So that's number one. Number two is what it teaches aligns with every other poet prophet that we've studied so far, right? Number three is these other poet prophets like Dante and Dostoevsky, they go back and they're able to see exactly what Jesus was teaching us, okay? So that's why I'm convinced that the Gospel of Thomas is the true teachings of Jesus. And there are also other teachings of Jesus that we find in the Bible that also conforms to our theory, okay? So this is from the Gospel of Matthew. And this is called the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus stands on a hill and he's preaching the secrets of the universe to people. Okay? So can you read, please, Alan?
Yeah. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Of theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
So this is a message to people, right? What matters is the spark inside of you. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are. It doesn't matter how powerful you are. In fact, it is probably those who are slaves that will benefit, who are more virtuous. And as such, they will inherit the kingdom. Okay, keep on reading.
You are the salt of earth, but if the salt loses its saintliness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand. And it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify you, Father in heaven.
Okay, so be the light, okay? Every one of you has a light in you. Every one of you has the power to change the universe. Every one of you has a power to do good in this world. Okay, keep on going.
You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
Okay, we are in this world to do as much good as possible. Thank evil people because it gives you opportunity to do good, okay? There's no evil in the world. How could you possibly do good? Right? Keep on going.
Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where moth and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
Okay, so focus on your own spiritual enlightenment. Focus on making your heart pure, good, and virtuous. Don't worry about other people. Don't worry about money and these things, because when you die, you can't take these things with you, but your heart will always follow you wherever you are. Okay, keep on going.
The eye is a lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness?
Okay, so this is a really important idea, okay? But we imagine reality. So what matters is how you imagine this reality. What matters is how you see the world. Okay, and how you see the world is a reflection of the spark inside of you. If you see goodness, if you do goodness, then goodness will come. Okay, this is also called the law of attraction. Okay, keep on going.
No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money.
Okay, this is a really important idea. What is Satan? Satan is money. It's power. Okay? So this world belongs to Satan. This world is ruled by Satan. There's nothing you can do about it. When you leave, that world is the world of God. Okay, so it's your choice. Okay, your choice is to triumph in this world or to triumph in the spiritual world. It's your choice, but you cannot have both, guys. Okay, you can be Elon Musk. You can have all this wealth in this world, but we'll see what happens to Elon Musk, after he dies. So he won't die, okay? So his plan is, I won't die, then I'm good. Okay? All right. Keep on going.
Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.
Okay, so this is a really important idea. The Christian religion tells us that you must believe in Jesus to be saved by Jesus. All that matters is believe in Jesus. Doesn't matter what you do. Doesn't matter what you say. What matters is your belief in Jesus. And what Jesus himself is telling us, no, no, no. Don't use my name. Okay? Don't follow me. Follow your heart. In fact, if you use my name, it's because you mean to do evil in this world. So the question then is, how do we get from this to the Catholic Church? Which is, nope, you must obey us. Otherwise, you'll be condemned to hell. Okay? And that's the topic we'll discuss next class, how the Catholic Church was created. And the argument I will make to you is that it was created by the Roman Empire, okay, and not Jesus himself. Okay, so any questions, guys? Yeah?
Like, you said that people have infinite lives, and like, death is a reset of your life, and you can learn many times. But I think death will just clear a person's memory, and they won't remember the mistakes and the things that they learned.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, yes, exactly. So the idea is the divine spark, right? So the divine spark either glows brightly or it dims. So when you die, what goes is not the brain. You won't remember anything, the memories, but what goes is the spark. Do you understand? And the spark, if it glows really brightly, it goes up to a higher plane. You're closer to the monad, you're closer to God, and therefore you feel more pleasure, right? But if your spark has been dimmed, it goes to a lower place. And so what you want to do is obviously glow that spark as much as possible, all right? And so again, I know this is hard to understand, but most people will not figure this out, okay? You understand? It may take like 50 lifetimes before you figure out, you know what, I should really try to glow my spark. It may take 1,000 lifetimes, 1,000,000 lifetimes, who knows? But it's your choice, do you understand? Some of us will figure out more quicker than others. Okay? So this is the thing that you must remember. Every religion teaches us that when you die, you won't remember how much money you have. You won't remember anything, okay? But what you will remember, what you will leave behind is the amount of goodness you did or the amount of evil you did. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? Any more questions, guys? Okay, great. So next class, we do the rise of the Catholic Church. Okay?
The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. I remember that detail with a clarity that still surprises me, because in the grand sweep of what happened next, the weather should have been the least significant thing. And yet, it was the backdrop, the gray, weeping sky that matched the gray, weeping landscape of my own soul. I sat by the window of the small apartment, the one with the chipped paint on the sill, and the radiator that clanked like a dying thing, watching the water course down the glass in uneven rivulets. Each drop seemed to carry with it a piece of the life I had so carefully constructed, washing it away into the gutters below. I was 32 years old, and by every metric the world holds up as a standard for success, I was a failure. But it was a failure of a very particular, very polished kind. I had done everything right. I had followed the blueprint. I was the girl who got the grades, who never caused a scene, who smiled in all the family photographs. I earned the degrees. I climbed the corporate ladder with a kind of desperate, clenched-teeth ambition. I married a man who fit the description, in the same way a mannequin fits a suit. Perfectly in form, hollow in substance. I wore the right clothes, drove the right car, lived in the right neighborhood. I curated my life the way one curates a museum exhibit. Everything in its place, everything labeled, everything sterile and untouchable. And yet, here I was, sitting in this dim apartment that smelled of old carpet and loneliness, the for-lease sign on the lawn outside, a final, mocking punctuation mark on the story I had tried to tell. The marriage had dissolved 2 years prior, a slow, agonizing unspooling that had left me feeling not so much heartbroken as emptied. The career had imploded a year after that. A corporate restructuring, they called it. A polite way of saying that the person who had given everything to the company was deemed expendable. Friends, the ones I thought I had, drifted away like smoke. They didn't know what to say to a woman who had been reduced to this. I didn't know what to say to myself. I had become a ghost, haunting the rooms of my own life. I would get up, not because I wanted to, but because my body remembered the habit of motion. I would go through the motions of job applications, of calls to recruiters, of polite, hollow conversations that went nowhere. I would eat because my stomach would eventually protest with a sharp, insistent ache. I would sleep in fits, often waking in the deep hours of the night to find the apartment dark and silent. The silence so heavy, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. In those early hours, I would lie there and conduct a thorough audit of my failures. I would trace them back to their roots, trying to pinpoint the exact moment where it had all gone wrong. Was it when I chose the safe major instead of the one I loved? Was it when I said "I do" to a man I barely knew, mistaking his silence for stability? Was it when I started measuring my worth in quarterly reports and performance reviews? I would turn these questions over and over, like a child worrying a loose tooth, finding a perverse comfort in the pain of it. The thought of God in those days was not a comfort. It was an accusation. If there was a God and I had grown up with a vague Sunday school understanding that there might be, then he was either impotent or cruel. I had tried to be good. I had tried to follow the rules. I had ticked all the boxes of respectable, middle-class morality. I didn't cheat. I didn't steal. I didn't shout obscenities at strangers. I was a good person. And look where it had gotten me. The universe, it seemed, was not a meritocracy. The idea of a God who had allowed all of this to happen, who had watched me build my house of cards and then breathed it down, seemed to me not a being worthy of worship, but a cosmic sadist. I remember one night, the rain had finally stopped, leaving a strange crystalline stillness in its wake. The air was cold and sharp. I was sitting on the floor of my empty living room, my back against the wall, surrounded by moving boxes I couldn't muster the will to unpack. Not the kind of bottom where you make a dramatic gesture, but the quieter, more terrifying kind where you simply cease to believe in the possibility of ascent. I had no more strategies. I had no more plans. I had no more arguments to make to myself about how I would fix this. I was, for the first time in my life, utterly and completely still, because there was nowhere left to run. And in that stillness, something happened. I don't know how to describe it without it sounding trite or overly dramatic, but it was as if a voice spoke, not to my ears, but to something deeper, to the marrow of my bones. It didn't come in words, not exactly. It came as a question, a gentle, persistent question that bypassed my frantic mind and lodged itself in my chest. The question was simply this: what if you are loved? It was absurd. It was the most absurd thing I had ever heard. I was a wreckage. I was a woman sitting on a dirty floor in an apartment she couldn't afford, with a resume full of achievements that now meant nothing, with a trail of broken relationships behind her, with a heart so hardened by bitterness I wasn't sure it could ever feel warmth again. What did love have to do with any of this? Love was a transaction. Love was something you earned. I had earned nothing. I deserved nothing. But the question would not leave. It was like a seed that had been planted in concrete, and yet, impossibly, I felt it begin to push, to crack the surface. It was the most terrifying and the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. It was terrifying because it threatened to dismantle the last thing I had left, my narrative of self-sufficient failure. I had built an identity around my ruin. I was the woman who had been wronged, who had failed, who had been abandoned. It was a bitter identity, but it was mine. This question, this whisper of love, was asking me to let go of that, to give up my right to my own despair. For days, I wrestled with it. I didn't know how, but I argued. I argued with the silence, with the air, with whatever had spoken to me. You don't understand, I would say. You don't know what I've done. You don't know the thoughts I've had, the bitterness I've nursed, the people I've pushed away. You don't know the depths of my cynicism. You can't love this. No one could love this. And then, one evening, I found myself walking. I had no destination, just a need to move, to escape the four walls that had become a coffin. I walked through streets I didn't know, past houses with warm yellow lights in the windows, places where families were gathered for dinner, where life was happening in a way that felt so foreign to me, it might as well have been on another planet. I walked until my legs ached, until the cold had seeped through my coat and into my bones. I found myself in front of a small building. It was unassuming, a brick structure with a simple wooden door and a single light burning above it. A church. I hadn't been inside a church in years, not since my grandmother's funeral, where I had sat in the back row and felt nothing but a cold impatience for the proceedings to be over. But something about this place, in the gathering dusk, stopped me. The light above the door wasn't bright, but it was steady. It was an invitation. My hand was on the door before I had consciously decided to open it. The wood was cold and smooth beneath my fingers. I pushed, and it swung open with a quiet groan. The inside was small, intimate. Rows of simple wooden pews led to a small altar with a cross. There were no stained glass windows, no grand organ, no ornate statues, just the cross, simple and stark. And silence, a profound, welcoming silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a presence in itself. I slipped into the back pew, the wood creaking softly beneath my weight. I sat there, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to say. I just sat, and for the first time in months, I stopped arguing. I looked at that cross. I had seen 1,000 crosses in my life, on necklaces, in paintings, in the backgrounds of movies, but I had never really seen it. I had never understood. In that moment, sitting in the silence of that small, empty church, I began to understand. That cross was not a symbol of a distant, judgmental God. It was the opposite. It was the picture of a God who, seeing the wreckage of my life, the wreckage of the world, did not stand at a distance and pronounce judgment. He stepped into it. He took on flesh. He knew hunger. He knew betrayal. He knew the sharp sting of abandonment by those closest to him. He knew what it was to weep at the grave of a friend, to be misunderstood, to be despised. And he went to that cross not because he was a cruel tyrant demanding a blood price, but because he was a loving father who would rather die than live without me. The tears came then. Not the hot, angry tears of frustration I had shed so many times in the dark of my apartment. These were different. They were quiet, and they came from a place I didn't know existed. They were tears of recognition, of homecoming. I was not sitting there because I had finally gotten my life together. I was not sitting there because I had said the right prayer or cleaned up my act. I was sitting there because I was broken, and in that brokenness, I had stumbled into the only place where broken things are welcome. I didn't say a formal prayer. I didn't know the right words, and I no longer believed in the right words. What I did was more like a sigh, a surrender. I just opened my hands, which were clenched tight in my lap, and I held them out, palms up, in the quiet of that sanctuary. It was a gesture of laying down. I laid down my bitterness, my self-pity, my carefully curated catalog of grievances. I laid down my pride, my need to be right, my insistence that I deserved better. I laid down the identity I had built around my failure. And in that laying down, something else began to rise. It was small, fragile, like the tiniest flame in a vast, dark space. But it was there. It was hope. That night was the beginning, but it was only the beginning. The change didn't happen overnight. The next morning, I woke up, and the apartment was still empty. The boxes were still unpacked, and the for lease sign was still on the lawn. The silence was still there, but something had shifted. The silence was no longer an enemy. It was a space in which I could listen. I started to listen. I didn't have a Bible. I think I had left the one from my childhood in a box somewhere, perhaps purposely. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to that small church. I went back the next day, and the day after that. I would sit in the back pew, in the quiet, and I would just be. I would sit with that feeling of being loved, that absurd, impossible notion, and I would let it wash over me. Some days it felt real. Other days it felt like a fantasy I was trying to convince myself of. But I kept showing up. One afternoon, a woman came in while I was there. She was older, with silver hair and a kind, weathered face. She was there to arrange flowers by the altar. She saw me sitting in the back, and she didn't rush over with a greeting or a pamphlet. She simply gave me a gentle smile and said, "The quiet is good, isn't it?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She went about her work, and the silence between us was comfortable. When she left, she paused by my pew and said, "You're welcome here, as long as you need." It was the first time in a very long time that someone had offered me something without wanting anything in return. That woman became a quiet presence in my life. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't give me a list of rules to follow or a checklist of behaviors to modify. She just walked with me. Eventually, she gave me a Bible, a worn, well-loved copy with notes in the margins. "Start with the Gospels," she said. "Get to know him." So I did. I started reading the Gospel of John, and as I read, I encountered a Jesus who was nothing like the stern, distant figure I had imagined. I read about a man who spoke to a woman at a well, a woman with a complicated past, a woman who had been married and divorced and was living with a man who was not her husband. And he didn't condemn her. He saw her. He knew her. And he offered her living water, a water that would quench the deepest thirst she had. I was that woman. I had spent my life drawing water from broken cisterns, achievement, relationships, status, approval, and I was parched. He was offering me himself. I read about a woman caught in the act of adultery, dragged before him by religious leaders who wanted to use her as a weapon. They were ready to stone her, to enforce the law with brutal, self-righteous precision. And Jesus, the one without sin, stooped down and wrote on the ground. One by one, the accusers dropped their stones and walked away. And then he looked at her, not with disgust, not with condescension, and he said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." That was him. That was his heart. He didn't excuse sin, but he didn't define a person by it. He offered a way out, a new beginning. I read about a man who touched lepers, who let a sinful woman wash his feet with her tears, who ate with tax collectors and sinners, who said that he came not for the healthy, but for the sick. I was sick. I was sick with a sickness that had no name, a sickness of the soul, a sickness of self-reliance that had left me isolated and bitter. And he was a physician. He wasn't repelled by my wounds. He came to heal them. The more I read, the more I realized that the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, was not a message about becoming a better version of myself. It was a message about dying to that self entirely and being raised to something new. It was about realizing that my best efforts at righteousness were like filthy rags, stained with pride and self-interest. I had thought that being a good person was about the things I didn't do. I didn't cheat, I didn't steal, I didn't commit adultery. But I had done something far worse. I had taken the life God had given me, and I had made myself the center of it. I had worshipped at the altar of my own reputation, my own success, my own image. And that altar had crumbled, leaving me with nothing. But Jesus offered me himself in place of that nothing. He offered to be my righteousness, my worth, my identity. He had lived the perfect life that I could not live. He had died the death that my sin deserved, and on the third day he had risen, conquering sin and death once and for all. He had done for me what I could never do for myself, and all he asked was that I stop trying to earn it, stop trying to deserve it, and simply receive it as a gift. That was the hardest part. My entire being was wired to earn. My hands were conditioned to grasp, to work, to produce. To open them and receive something freely offered felt like a violation of every instinct I had. But that's what I did that night in the small church, and it's what I continued to do day by day as I read, as I sat in the quiet, as I let the truth of who he is sink into the deepest parts of me. The circumstances of my life did not magically transform overnight. I did not get a phone call the next day with a dream job offer. The pain of the past did not vanish like morning mist. There were still days when the bitterness would rise up in my throat, when the old anger would claw at my heart. There were still nights when I would wake up in a cold sweat, the familiar weight of failure pressing down on me, whispering that it was all a delusion, that I was fooling myself, that someone like me could never be truly loved. But now there was a difference. When those whispers came, I had somewhere to go. I had someone to go to. I would take those feelings, the shame, the fear, the self-loathing, and I would lay them at the foot of that cross. Not because I was supposed to, not because it was a religious duty, but because I had learned that he was the only one who could bear them, and he did. He never turned me away. He never said, "You've had this thought too many times, you're too much work." He was patient. He was kind. He was and is faithful when I am faithless. The process of healing was slow, and it was often painful. It meant letting go of the stories I had told myself about the people who had hurt me, not because they were right, but because holding on to the bitterness was like drinking poison and expecting them to die. It meant forgiving the ex-husband, not for his sake, but for mine. It meant forgiving myself for the years I had wasted, chasing things that could never satisfy. It meant learning to see my past not as a series of failures that disqualified me, but as a landscape of grace, a testament to the fact that God specializes in bringing beauty from ashes. I started attending the services, sitting in the back at first, feeling like an imposter among people who seemed to have a fluency in faith that I lacked. But they welcomed me with the same gentle, non-demanding love that the silver-haired woman had shown me. They didn't care about my resume, or my marital status, or my bank account. They asked me about my heart. They prayed with me, not in fancy theological language, but with simple, heartfelt words. They shared their own stories of brokenness and redemption, and I realized that I was not the only one with a complicated past. The church was not a museum for saints. It was a hospital for sinners. It was in that community that I began to understand that my relationship with Jesus was not meant to be a solitary thing. He had not saved me just for my own private benefit. He had saved me into a family. I had never been good at family. My own family had been functional in a distant, reserved way. We didn't talk about feelings. We didn't share our struggles. We presented a polished facade to the world. But here, in this ragtag group of believers, I found a different kind of family. It was messy, it was imperfect, but it was real. We bore one another's burdens. We confessed our sins to one another. We wept with those who wept, and rejoiced with those who rejoiced. As I grew in my faith, I began to see the threads of God's grace woven through my entire story, even the parts I had thought were irredeemable. The failed marriage taught me that no human relationship can bear the weight of ultimate meaning. It taught me that I had been looking for a savior in a spouse, and that was a burden no person could carry. The lost career taught me that my identity was not in my job title. It stripped away the scaffolding I had built around myself and left me with the raw, essential question of who I really was. The loneliness taught me that there is a solitude that is not empty, but full, a solitude in which the voice of God can be heard more clearly. I began to understand the words of the Apostle Paul, who spoke of boasting in his weaknesses, because when he was weak, then he was strong. I had spent my life trying to be strong, trying to project an image of invulnerability. But it was in my weakness, in my utter inability to save myself, that the power of Christ was able to rest on me. I stopped hiding my scars because they were not marks of shame. They were the places where God's healing light had entered. Years have passed since that rainy season of my life. The small apartment is a distant memory. I have a home now, a modest one, but it is filled with warmth and with the laughter of friends who have become family. I have work that I love, work that uses the gifts God gave me, not for my own glory, but to serve others. I am not defined by my failures, and I am not defined by my successes. I am defined by one thing alone. I am a woman who was lost and is found, who was blind and now sees, who was dead in her trespasses and sins, and has been made alive together with Christ. I still have struggles. Life is still hard. There are still days when the old patterns of thought try to reassert themselves, when I am tempted to measure my worth by my productivity or my circumstances. But I have learned to take those thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ. I have learned to preach the gospel to myself every day, to remind myself that my acceptance before God is not based on my performance, but on His finished work. What has He done in my life? He has done everything. He took a heart of stone and gave me a heart of flesh. He took a spirit of despair and gave me a garment of praise. He took a life that was fragmented and shattered, and He has been, piece by piece, making it whole. He has given me a purpose that transcends my own happiness, to know Him and to make Him known. He has given me a hope that is not a vague optimism, but a sure and steadfast anchor for my soul, a hope that reaches beyond this broken world to the day when He will make all things new. I love Jesus Christ. I say that not as a religious slogan, but as the most profound and simple truth of my existence. I love Him because He first loved me. I love Him because He sought me when I was not seeking Him. I love Him because He did not wait for me to get my act together, but came to me in the midst of my mess. I love Him because He is gentle and humble in heart, and in Him I have found rest for my soul. If you are reading this and you are in a place of darkness, a place of failure, a place of despair, I want you to know that the same love that reached down into my wreckage is reaching out to you. It doesn't matter how far you have strayed. It doesn't matter how many times you have failed. It doesn't matter if you have no idea how to pray or what to believe. The door is open, the light is on, and the one who stands at the door is not a judge with a gavel, but a Father with open arms. He is not asking you to clean up your life before you come to Him. He is asking you to come to Him so that He can clean it up. He is not looking for your perfection. He is looking for your heart. He is the good shepherd who leaves the 99 to find the one that is lost. And He will find you. He will carry you home. My life is a testimony to His faithfulness. It is not a story of my strength, but of His. It is not a story of my goodness, but of His grace. Every day I am learning to rest in that grace, to trust that He who began a good work in me will carry it on to completion. I still have so much to learn, so much to grow, but I am no longer afraid. I am no longer alone. I am held in hands that were pierced for me, and those hands will never let me go. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long, not because of who I am, but because of who He is. He is Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever, and He is everything. The sun was setting over the coastal town, casting long shadows across the worn wooden planks of the boardwalk. I stood at the railing, watching the waves roll in with their endless, rhythmic certainty, and I felt the salt spray on my face like a baptism I had never known I needed. It was here, in this place of crashing tides and crying gulls, that the last pieces of my carefully constructed life had finally crumbled to dust. It was also here, in the wreckage, that I found everything I had never known I was searching for. I was 47 years old when I arrived in that town with nothing but a suitcase, a car that was threatening to give out at any moment, and a heart so bruised and battered I wasn't sure it would ever beat properly again. The town was small, the kind of place that tourists pass through in the summer months and forgot by autumn. I had chosen it precisely because of that. I wanted to be forgotten. I wanted to disappear into the fog that rolled in off the ocean each morning and become as insubstantial as the mist itself. The apartment I rented was above a closed-down bait shop, a fact that would have seemed absurdly poetic to anyone who knew the trajectory of my life. I had once been a woman who dined in restaurants where the menus had no prices, who attended galas where the champagne flowed like water, who moved through rooms filled with people who measured their worth in square footage and stock options. Now I was living above a place that had sold worms and tackle to fishermen. The universe I had come to understand had a sense of humor. It was not a kind humor. I had left behind a life that by any external measure had been the picture of success. I had been the chief executive of a company I had helped build from the ground up, a company that bore my fingerprints on every policy, every strategy, every hard-won victory. I had poured 23 years of my life into that organization. I had sacrificed marriages, 2 of them, to it. I had sacrificed friendships, health, the quiet moments of peace that most people take for granted. I had told myself that I was building something that mattered, that I was creating a legacy. That the late nights and the missed birthdays and the relationships that withered on the vine were all worth it because I was making an impact on the world. And then, in the space of a single board meeting, it was all taken away. Not because of incompetence, not because of failure, but because of politics, because of greed. Because the people I had trusted, the partners I had considered allies, saw an opportunity to consolidate power and took it. They didn't fire me outright. That would have been too messy, too public. They made it impossible for me to stay. They chipped away at my authority, undermined my decisions, questioned my judgment in whispers that grew louder each day. They created an environment so toxic, so suffocating, that leaving began to feel like the only way to preserve what was left of my sanity. I remember the day I walked out of that building for the last time. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way. I had cleaned out my office myself, refusing the offer of boxes and assistants. I carried a single cardboard box to my car, filled with photographs and a few personal items. Everything else, the awards, the plaques, the symbols of 2 decades of striving, I left behind. They belonged to that place now, artifacts of a woman who no longer existed. The first year after was a blur of bitterness and legal battles. I hired lawyers to fight for the severance I was owed, to untangle the non-compete clauses that had been designed to trap me. I won, eventually, but the victory tasted like ash. The money I received was substantial, but it felt like blood money, a payment for the years I would never get back, for the person I had become in service to a company that had discarded me without a second thought. I tried to reinvent myself. I consulted, I advised, I sat on boards, but my heart was no longer in it. The fire that had driven me for so long had been extinguished, and I couldn't figure out how to relight it. I threw myself into philanthropy, thinking that if I couldn't build a business, I could at least do some good in the world. I wrote checks, attended fundraisers, lent my name to causes, but even that felt hollow. I was going through the motions, a ghost walking through a life that no longer fit. It was during one of those fundraisers that I met a man who would, unwittingly, set in motion the chain of events that led me to that coastal town. He was charming, intelligent, and he seemed to see something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself. He pursued me with a kind of gentle persistence that I found disarming. After the wreckage of my professional life, the idea of being pursued, of being wanted, was intoxicating. I fell for him, or perhaps I fell for the idea of him, for the possibility of a life that wasn't defined by quarterly reports and strategic plans. The relationship moved quickly. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs I chose to ignore. The way he deflected questions about his past, the inconsistencies in his stories, the friends who seemed to know a version of him that I did not. But I was so desperate to believe that I could be happy, that I could have something good, that I silenced the voice in my head that whispered caution. We married in a small ceremony, just the two of us and a handful of witnesses. I told myself that the simplicity of it was romantic, a departure from the extravagance of my past. In truth, it was a red flag I was too blind to see. The unraveling began slowly. There were the late nights, the unexplained absences, the phone calls he would step outside to take. There were the requests for money, loans he called them, to cover temporary shortfalls in his business ventures. I gave freely at first, because that is what partners did. Then I gave more, because I was afraid of what it would mean if I stopped. By the time I discovered the truth, it was too late. There had been no business ventures, there had been gambling debts, secret accounts, a second life I had been utterly blind to. And in the process of trying to keep up the facade, he had drained nearly everything I had. The divorce was swift and brutal. I just wanted him out of my life. But when the dust settled, I found myself looking at a bank account that was a fraction of what it had been, a reputation that had been quietly smeared by the rumors he spread in his defense, and a heart that had been broken open in ways I had never thought possible. It was then that the silence I had been running from finally caught up with me. In the empty rooms of the house I could no longer afford, in the long, sleepless nights when the city outside my window hummed with a life that no longer included me, I was forced to sit with myself, and I did not like what I found. I had spent my entire life building, achieving, conquering. I had measured my worth in zeros on a balance sheet and titles on a business card. I had defined myself by my ability to produce, to perform, to succeed. And now, with those things stripped away, I had no idea who I was. I was like a tree that had been propped up by scaffolding for so long that when the scaffolding was removed, it collapsed under its own weight. There was nothing holding me up. There was nothing inside me that could stand on its own. The thought of God had never been entirely absent from my life, but it had always been peripheral, a concept I acknowledged in the same way I acknowledged the existence of gravity or the rotation of the earth. I had been raised in a home where faith was a cultural artifact, something you put on for holidays and special occasions. My mother had a Bible on her nightstand, but I never saw her open it. My father said grace at Thanksgiving and Christmas, but the words were rote, emptied of meaning through decades of repetition. I had absorbed from them the idea that God, if he existed, was a distant figure, vaguely benevolent, but not particularly involved in the day-to-day affairs of human life. He was, in my understanding, a kind of cosmic CEO, running the universe perhaps, but too busy with the macro to concern himself with the micro of my personal struggles. That understanding, or lack thereof, had served me well enough when I was the one running the show. I didn't need God when I had spreadsheets and strategies. I didn't need faith when I had 5-year plans and performance metrics. I was my own God, and I had done a magnificent job of convincing myself that my way was working. But now, sitting in the wreckage of everything I had built, I began to wonder. The questions came unbidden, rising from a place I had long since walled off. What was the point of it all? If I had succeeded, if I had kept the company, if I had never met the man, if I had died at the peak of my power with my portfolio full and my reputation intact, I would have been buried in the ground like every other human being who had ever lived. The awards would gather dust. The company would move on. The name on the building would eventually be painted over or torn down. What was it all for? I had heard people speak of having a relationship with Jesus Christ. I had seen the bumper stickers, the billboards, the televangelists with their perfectly coiffed hair and their promises of prosperity. I had dismissed it all as the opiate of the masses, a crutch for people who couldn't face the harsh realities of existence. I was too intelligent, too sophisticated, too self-sufficient for such things. Or so I had believed. But there, in the quiet of my empty house, with my career in ruins and my heart in shreds, I found myself doing something I had never done before. I found myself praying. It wasn't a proper prayer, not the kind I had heard in churches or seen in movies. It was more like a cry, a raw and desperate plea, torn from the depths of a soul that had run out of options. I don't remember the exact words, but I remember the essence of it. It was this: if you are real, if you are there, I need you. I don't know what I believe, and I don't know if I even have the right to ask, but I have nothing left. I have tried everything, and I have failed at everything that mattered. If you are there, please show me. Please help me. The days that followed were not marked by any dramatic sign. There was no burning bush, no voice from the heavens, no sudden transformation that turned my sorrow into joy. What happened was quieter, slower, but in its own way, more profound. It was as if a seed had been planted in the barren soil of my heart, and though I could not see it growing, I could feel something shifting beneath the surface. I started taking walks, long, aimless walks through the city, through neighborhoods I had never explored, past churches I had always hurried by without a second glance. I found myself pausing in front of them, reading the names on the signs, the times of services, the messages on the outdoor bulletin boards. Most of them were unremarkable, filled with announcements about potlucks and youth group meetings. But one of them, a small church tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, had a message that stopped me in my tracks. It was simple, printed in black letters on a white board. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I stood there for a long time, reading those words over and over. Weary, burdened, rest. Those words were for me. They were written for the woman who had carried the weight of her own success on her shoulders for decades, who had believed that rest was something you earned after you had done enough, achieved enough, become enough. And now, with nothing left to show for all that striving, the promise of rest, not as a reward, but as a gift, was almost too much to comprehend. I went back the next Sunday. I sat in the back row, as I would do many times in the months that followed, and I listened. The building was small, the congregation modest. There were no elaborate productions, no fog machines or stadium seating, just a simple room with wooden pews, a cross at the front, and people who sang hymns with a sincerity that moved me in ways I couldn't articulate. The pastor that day spoke from the Gospel of Matthew, the same passage that had drawn me to the church. He talked about the kind of rest Jesus offers, a rest that is not the absence of work, but the presence of peace. He spoke about the yoke that Jesus invites us to take up, a yoke that is easy and a burden that is light. I had always thought of religion as adding weight to an already heavy life. More rules, more obligations, more things to do to earn favor with a demanding God. But what this man was describing was the opposite. He was describing a God who said, "Stop striving. Stop trying to earn what you can never deserve. Let me carry the weight." After the service, I tried to slip out unnoticed, but the pastor caught up with me at the door. He was an older man, with kind eyes and hands that looked like they had done real work. He didn't try to shake my hand or give me a brochure. He simply said, "I'm glad you came. I hope you'll come back." And then he stepped aside and let me leave. I did come back. Week after week, I came back. I sat in that back row and I listened. I listened to the stories of a God who had created the universe, and yet knew the number of hairs on my head. I listened to the story of a people who had been enslaved and oppressed, and a God who heard their cries and came down to deliver them. I listened to the story of a king who did not come in power and glory, but as a baby born in a stable to a poor young woman in a conquered land. The story of Jesus began to unfurl before me like a flower I had never seen before, each petal revealing a new dimension of beauty. I read about his birth, the shepherds in the fields, the angels singing glory to God in the highest, I read about his childhood, the years of obscurity in Nazareth, the ordinary life that preceded the extraordinary ministry. And then I read about his ministry, the 3 years that changed the world forever. What struck me most was not the miracles, though they were astonishing. It was the way he treated people. He had no regard for the hierarchies that humans had constructed. He touched lepers, the untouchables of his society. He spoke to women in public, a scandalous thing for a rabbi to do. He welcomed children when his disciples tried to send them away. He ate with tax collectors and sinners, the people who had been written off by the religious elite. He was kind to the broken, merciful to the desperate, gentle with the ashamed. I saw myself in those people. I had been proud once, too proud to see my need. But now I was the woman at the well, drawing water from a source that could never satisfy, meeting a man who offered living water that would become a spring within me, welling up to eternal life. I was the woman caught in adultery, dragged before him by accusers who cared nothing for me except as a tool to trap him. And he, the only one without sin, looked at me and said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." The more I learned about Jesus, the more I realized that my understanding of God had been fundamentally flawed. I had believed in a God who demanded performance, who kept score, who loved me when I was good and turned away when I failed. But the God revealed in Jesus was different. He was a God who pursued, who sought, who left the 99 to find the one. He was a God who did not wait for me to clean myself up, but who came to me in my filth and my shame and said, "Let me wash you." I remember the night I finally understood. It was not in the church, but in my own home, late at night, with the Bible open on my kitchen table. I was reading the story of the prodigal son, a story I had heard as a child, but had never truly grasped. A young man demands his inheritance from his father, essentially saying, "I wish you were dead." He goes to a far country and squanders everything in reckless living. When a famine comes, he finds himself starving, longing to eat the pods he feeds to the pigs. And in his desperation, he decides to go back to his father, not as a son, but as a hired servant, because even his father's servants have enough to eat. I had been that son. I had taken the life God had given me, the talents, the opportunities, the breath in my lungs, and I had used them for my own glory. I had gone to a far country of self-sufficiency and pride. I had squandered everything on pursuits that could never satisfy. And now, in the famine of my soul, I was ready to come home. But what happened next in the story undid me. The father, watching and waiting, sees his son while he is still a long way off. He runs to him, which was undignified for a man of his standing, and throws his arms around him and kisses him. The son begins his rehearsed speech, but the father cuts him off. He doesn't want to hear about hired servants. He calls for the best robe, a ring for his finger, sandals for his feet. He kills the fattened calf and throws a party, because his son who was dead is alive again, who was lost is now found. That was the God I was meeting. Not a distant CEO, not a harsh judge, not a cosmic scorekeeper. A father. A father who had been watching for me, waiting for me, longing for me to come to my senses and come home. A father who did not care about my failures, my wasted years, my foolish choices. A father who only wanted me back. That night I did not just believe in God, I surrendered to him. I got on my knees in my kitchen, the linoleum cold and hard beneath me, and I confessed everything. I confessed my pride, my self-reliance, my idolatry of success. I confessed the years I had spent building a kingdom for myself while ignoring the kingdom of God. I confessed my bitterness, my unforgiveness, the way I had hardened my heart against the people who had hurt me. I told him that I had nothing left to offer, that I was coming home empty-handed, that I was throwing myself on his mercy. And in that moment, something happened. It was not a lightning bolt or a vision. It was something quieter, but no less real. It was a presence, a weight of glory that filled my small kitchen, a warmth that spread through my chest, a sense of being seen and known and loved in a way I have never experienced. I wept, not with the tears of sorrow I had shed so many times, but with tears of release, of relief, of joy. The prodigal had come home, and the father was throwing a party. That was the beginning, but it was only the beginning. The journey that followed was not a straight line from despair to happiness. It was a winding road, with switchbacks and steep climbs and dark valleys. But I was no longer walking it alone. The same Jesus who had met me in my kitchen was with me every step of the way. I left the city not long after that. The memories were too heavy, the ghosts too numerous. I sold what remained of my possessions, packed what would fit in my car, and drove until I reached the ocean. That's how I found myself in that small coastal town, in the apartment above the closed bait shop, with the sound of the waves as my constant companion. The church I found there was even smaller than the one I had left behind. It was a white clapboard building with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left, as if it had been worn down by decades of sea winds. The congregation was a collection of fishermen, shopkeepers, retirees, and a handful of young families. They sang hymns in the old style, accompanied by a piano that was perpetually out of tune. The pastor was a woman, which had surprised me at first, but I quickly came to love her straightforward way of preaching and her deep, abiding love for the scriptures. In that church, I began to learn what it meant to follow Jesus, not just believe in him. I learned that faith was not a one-time decision, but a daily choice to trust, to surrender, to pick up my cross and follow. I learned that the Christian life was not about being good enough, but about being connected to the one who is good. I learned that the same power that raised Jesus from the dead lived in me, not to make me successful by the world's standards, but to transform me into the person God had created me to be. The transformation was not always comfortable. There were things in my heart that had to be rooted out, old patterns of thinking that had to be renewed. I had spent decades measuring my worth by my productivity, and learning to rest in my identity as a beloved child of God was a daily battle. I had been a woman who held grudges, who kept careful accounts of wrongs done against her, and learning to forgive, truly forgive, was a process that took years. There were relationships I had to mend, apologies I had to make, pride I had to swallow. But God was patient with me. He was gentle. He never shamed me for my slowness, never grew frustrated with my repeated failures. He simply kept working, kept shaping, kept reminding me that I was a work in progress, and that he who had begun a good work in me would be faithful to complete it. One of the most profound changes he brought about was in my understanding of love. I had spent my life thinking of love as something you earned, something that was conditional on your performance. I had loved my company because it gave me identity. I had loved my ex-husband because I thought he would give me security. I had loved myself only when I was achieving, producing, succeeding. But the love of God was different. It was unconditional, unearned, unending. It was a love that had pursued me when I was running away, that had called me when I was hiding, that had welcomed me when I came home with nothing. That love began to change how I loved others. I started to see the people around me not as obstacles to my success or instruments for my comfort, but as souls for whom Christ died. The grumpy old man who lived down the hall, the young mother struggling with her children, the teenager who bagged my groceries with sullen resentment. Each of them was a person loved by God, and that made them worthy of my love, regardless of what they could do for me. I began to get involved in the community. I started volunteering at a local food bank, then at a shelter for women who were fleeing domestic violence. It was there that I found my calling, the thing God had been preparing me for through all the years of my life. My business skills, the strategic thinking I had honed over decades, the ability to organize and lead, none of that had been wasted. God had been using it all, shaping me for this moment. I helped the shelter expand its services, secure funding, build a program that not only provided safe housing, but also job training and counseling and long-term support. For the first time in my life, I was using my gifts not to build my own kingdom, but to build His. And the joy I found in that work was deeper than anything I had ever experienced in a boardroom. There were still hard days, days when the trauma of the women I worked with felt overwhelming, days when the funding fell through or the bureaucracy threatened to strangle our efforts. But I was no longer carrying those burdens alone. I had a community of believers who prayed with me, worked alongside me, reminded me of the hope we had in Christ. I also began to understand suffering in a new way. My own suffering, the loss of my career, the betrayal of my marriage, the years of emptiness, had been the very thing that drove me to Jesus. It had been the gift I never would have chosen, but could no longer live without. And now, as I walked alongside women who had suffered in ways I could only imagine, I understood that my scars were not marks of shame, but credentials of compassion. I could sit with a woman who had lost everything, because I had lost everything. I could tell her that there was life on the other side of despair, because I had found it. The Apostle Paul wrote that we are to comfort others with the comfort we have received from God. I had received so much comfort, so much grace, so much undeserved mercy, and now I got to pour that out on others. It was the most humbling and the most fulfilling work I had ever done. As the years passed, I found that my love for Jesus only deepened. The more I knew Him, the more I realized how little I knew, and the more I wanted to know. I studied the scriptures with a hunger I had never brought to any academic pursuit. I prayed, not in the formal, structured way I had once imagined a prayer required, but in a constant, running conversation throughout my day. I learned to listen, to be still, to wait on Him. I learned that His presence was not something I had to strive for. It was something He had promised never to withdraw. There were seasons of doubt, seasons when the old voices would return, whispering that it was all a delusion, that I was fooling myself, that a woman with my past could never be truly loved by a holy God. In those seasons, I learned to cling to what I knew rather than what I felt. I knew that Christ had died for me. I knew that He had risen. I knew that He had promised never to leave me nor forsake me. I held on to those truths like a lifeline, and they held me. There were also seasons of joy so profound that I thought my heart would burst. I remember one Easter morning, standing on the beach before dawn with a group from my church, watching the sun rise over the ocean. We sang hymns as the sky turned from black to purple to pink to gold. And I thought about that first Easter morning, the women going to the tomb with their spices, expecting to find a dead body, and finding instead an empty grave and an angel who said, "He is not here, He is risen." He is risen. Those two words changed everything, because if Jesus is risen, then death is not the end. If Jesus is risen, then sin does not have the final word. If Jesus is risen, then every promise He ever made is true. If Jesus is risen, then I can face whatever this life throws at me, because I know that the one who conquered the grave is with me, and He will lead me through the valley of the shadow of death, into the light of eternal day. I am 63 years old now. My hair is gray, my hands are gnarled with arthritis, and I move more slowly than I used to. But I have never been more alive. The work at the shelter continues, though I have stepped back from the day-to-day management, and now serve more as a mentor, a grandmother to the young women who come through our doors. I spend my mornings in prayer and scripture, my afternoons walking along the beach or visiting with friends, my evenings gathered with the small community of believers who have become my family. I think often about the woman I used to be, the one who sat in that empty house in the city, wondering if her life was over. That woman had no idea what was waiting for her. She thought she had lost everything, but she had only lost what she could not keep. What she gained, what I gained, is what cannot be taken away. I have learned that the gospel is not a message about how to make your life better. It is a message about how your life must die, so that you can receive the life of Christ in its place. I died to my pride, my self-sufficiency, my need to be in control. I died to my identity as a successful executive, a wealthy philanthropist, a woman who had it all together. And in that death, I found true life. The life of Jesus lived in me and through me, a life that is not defined by circumstances, but by an unshakable hope. What has he done in my life? He has done everything. He took a woman who was dead in her trespasses and sins, and made her alive together with Christ. He took a woman who was chasing after wind, and gave her a purpose that will echo into eternity. He took a woman who was burdened and weary, and gave her rest. He took a woman who was lost, and brought her home. I love Jesus Christ. I love him because he first loved me. I love him because he sought me when I was not seeking him. I love him because he did not give me what I deserved, but gave me what I could never earn. I love him because he is patient with my slowness, gentle with my failures, faithful when I am faithless. I love him because he is the author and perfecter of my faith, the founder and finisher of the story he is writing in my life. If you are reading these words and you are where I was, empty, weary, burdened, wondering if there is any hope left, I want you to know that there is. Not in a philosophy, not in a program, not in a self-help strategy. There is hope in a person. His name is Jesus. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is the good shepherd who leaves the 99 to find the one. He is the father who runs to meet the prodigal. He is the bridegroom who loves his bride with an everlasting love. You do not need to clean yourself up before you come to him. You do not need to have the right words or the right theology. You just need to come. Come as you are, with your failures and your fears, your bitterness and your brokenness. Come to the one who said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He will not turn you away. He has never turned anyone away, and he will not start with you. This is my story. It is a story of ruin and redemption, of death and resurrection, of a woman who tried to build her life on sand and found at last the rock. It is not a story of my strength, but of his. It is not a story of my goodness, but of his grace. And it is still being written. Every day, he is making me more like himself. Every day, he is using me to bring a little more of his kingdom to this broken world. Every day, I am learning to love him more, to trust him more, to rest in him more. One day, this story will reach its earthly end. My body will fail. My heart will stop. My breath will cease. But that will not be the end of the story. It will be the beginning of the next chapter. The chapter where faith becomes sight, where hope becomes reality, where love is finally, fully, eternally realized. I will see him face to face. I will fall at his feet and worship. And I will hear him say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord." Until that day, I will keep telling this story. I will keep speaking of his goodness, his mercy, his love. I will keep inviting others to come and see, to taste and know that the Lord is good. I will keep loving him, serving him, following him, because he is worthy. He is worthy of all my praise, all my devotion, all my life. He is Jesus Christ, my Lord, my Savior, my friend, my God. And he is everything.